know the guy who played Frank Fiscella? Paul. Can you also tell where can you put
Coby has the bios on everybody. Let's get a bio on Coby.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. As Rob said, my name is Coby, and I'd like to thank and welcome everybody that has come along tonight. Thank you to you guys. Whether it's to personally support Riley and his unabashedly exposing memoir, What is Real? The Life and Crimes of Darnell Riley, for the free drinks, or because you have a real passion to better understand the California prison system, all of which we will successfully be satisfied tonight. So when Riley first asked me to moderate this event, I immediately said yes. And then I thought no, because I didn't think I had enough tattoos to be in this lineup. And then I read the book, and then I was just too scared to say no, so here we are. But no, that couldn't be further from the truth. The thing is, the dichotomy between the Riley that I know and the Darnell that the marshals grabbed that March morning, it made reading the story for me a whole experience in itself. While I can still hear him through his words in the book and the intense experiences detailed in his real and raw recount of his incarceration, it made it a confronting but well worth it ride. Often heartbreaking and gut-wrenching, but always honest. It was a very true glimpse into a world that hopefully many of us will never have to see any clearer than we do in his book. So with that, firstly, I would like to welcome the man of the hour, the reason that we're all here this evening, my friend and author of What is Real? The Life and Crimes of Darnell Riley, Riley Perez. Woo!
Thank you for coming out. Once upon a midnight dreary, Edgar Allan Poe. Chapter 1, Day 1, Confinement. I sat alone, confined to a disagreeably damp holding cell. The officers traversed the hall, their boots and keys clanking with musical synchronicity. I thought that I would finally have a moment to question my thoughts, but the slamming of cell doors and the constant echoing of names being summoned never let up. There was a pattern building with the accused, as they got rushed from their holding cells into wood-paneled courtrooms, then off to staging areas, back down dirt-stained hallways, then quiet. Loneliness is a shifting concept. I was alone in my journey, but never actually left to myself for more than 5 minutes. My new companion, an ash-ridden man, entered the holding cell carried by knobby knees that nearly buckled beneath his skeletal frame as he made his way to an open bench. He drifted into a coma-like trance, and the snoring began, accompanied by violent bursts of gassy air. The ashy man slept and shook as I looked on. 10 minutes elapsed before the ashy man found his strength to stand. He stood on shaky legs, and for the first time acknowledged that I was sharing the space with him. Not forgetting his character as the feeble jail addict, he resumed his shaking. I offered him an apple I had left from the cruel excuse of a meal they left earlier, and the addict stopped shaking long enough to say, "No thanks, I'm kicking heroin." I looked on as the shaking resumed. The dingy blue LA County jumpsuit engulfed his body like he were in his eternal coffin. "I'm tired of this shit, this life." And so began his confessions. I nodded every 20 words to act interested, my fear being that if he started slicing at his arms with a razor, there would be no way for me to explain this to my authorities. He carried on with his story, and I was relieved that he didn't have the courage to end his life. He would make his confession stretching back of over 40 years of slamming junk. He talked, and I nodded every 20 words to act interested. I was saved by a visit from my attorney. Ron Richards had little room for dancing around the severity of what I was facing, so in order of charges in the indictment, he rambled on at warp speed. I heard little of what he said until You are facing 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. I was aware of the charges, but hearing them repeated caused my legs to go numb. I pondered the heroin route the old man had told me about. Maybe I could end it all. And then I remembered that I detest needles, and I am a fuck up, and would probably err the shot and be a vegetable forever. Returning from the self-induced horror film that I was directing in my mind, I heard Ron repeat the severity of the charges. The words individually are benign, but once arranged in a sentence, the events the words describe become ghoulish. A humming buzz seized my mind, and the last parts of his monologue settled in, and before I could ask questions, he was gone. My ashy companion started a conversation to fill the dead air. In his deliberate, measured tone, the confessions poured out of how he began his affair with heroin. The cases in his speech were maddening, as if for the first time he were relieving himself of the burden of his experiences. All the overdoses he came close to not returning from, the missed opportunities. I asked, what was too much? He didn't answer. His head shook in disagreement with what he knew I was asking of him. The fright of being in this hell that I can end with suicide seized my thoughts. How terribly depressing it would be if the system removed suicide as an option. Before I could adjust to the new feeling of despair, in walked a young Hispanic inmate. He walked in a mummy stutter step. He sat and said nothing. I said nothing in return. Minutes passed, and several officers came to retrieve the kid, shackling him at his legs and wrists, connecting his chains to his waist. No one spoke. The kid complied without incident, clearly practiced at this ritual. Then, in a whisper that was positively menacing, he said, "They're going to kill me. I have life." He repeated the word life. The vacant look remained in his stare. He was stuck on the word, not talking to anyone in particular, but saying it as if he had just heard it for the first time. His escorts extracted him from the cell, and he continued with his study of the word life. With each step, his youthful appearance became hardened. Whatever he meant by, "They're going to kill me," was the end of everything he's got and everything he'll never have. I possibly just witnessed a kid who may never have the luxury of being with a woman. Why was he about to die, and who was going to kill him?
Next, we're going to hear from another talented writer in the room, Rob Weiss. Rob is a writer and producer, and whose credits include hit HBO series Entourage, How to Make It in America, and Ballers with the other Riley, The Rock.
My lack of microphone. My lack of fear of this barbaric methodology of death. I rely upon my faith. It has nothing to do with machismo, with manhood, or with some pseudo-form of gang street code. This is pure faith and predicated on my redemption. So therefore I just stand strong and continue to tell you, your audience, and the world that I am innocent. And yes, I have been a wretched person, but I have redeemed myself. And I say to you and all those who can listen and will listen that redemption is tailor-made for the wretched. And that's what I used to be. That's what I would like the world to remember me. That's how I would like my legacy to be remembered. As a redemptive transition. Something that I believe is not exclusive just for the so-called sanctimonious, the elitists. And it is not predicated on color or race or social stratum or one's religious background. It's accessible for everybody. That's the beauty about it. And whether others choose to believe that I have redeemed myself or not, I worry not, because I know, and God knows, and you can believe that all of the youths that I have helped, they know too. that I continue to help, they know too. So with that, I am grateful. I say to you and everyone else, God bless. So take care. Stanley Tukey Williams, death row inmate. Stanley Williams was found guilty of several murders in South Los Angeles and was sentenced to death. He had exhausted all of his appeals, and Governor Schwarzenegger refused clemency. He was one of the founding members of the Crips, a criminal street gang that has spread throughout America. He would denounce and apologize for his leadership of a movement that he says was intended to protect the community from predatory gangs and cops in the aftermath of the Watts riot in 1969. He vehemently proclaimed his innocence. Thousands of protesters gathered outside of San Quentin Correctional Facility to protest the execution of Stanley Williams, but at 12:35 a.m. on December 13, 2005, Williams' birthday no less, medical personnel from the California Department of Corrections administered a lethal injection protocol that was designed to render the patient unconscious, then to stop his breathing, and eventually his heart. They achieved the goal of the sentence. I sat on my bunk in the darkened dorm. We had been denied power and the use of all sanitary facilities. The institution was on lockdown in anticipation that inmates would stage a protest or strike out at the officers. The officers that overlooked the dorm that I was assigned to appeared shocked as the male voice that came over the loudspeaker announced in a sinister tone, "Tukey is dead." The voice repeated the announcement 4 times, with his voice trailing off each time, followed with the sadistic laughter of a group of voices. What the officers didn't know was that the Crips had planned attacks that were to take place after the lockdown was lifted and the program returned to what was considered normal. The Bloods in the SS agreed to back the Crips' decision. The officers that mocked the death of Tukey Williams served to affirm the decision to strike at the officers. On the 15th of December, a group of Crips housed in several dorms throughout the Supermax facility attacked the officers that entered the dorm to count and scan the inmates. The attacks were meant to convey to the officers that although they came to the facility on their own accord, they were not guaranteed to leave. And for this statement, the entire population was forced. The entire population was forced back into darkness. Visits were canceled, the food was served hours past the scheduled time of service, and searches were conducted for hours into the middle of the night, not showing concern for the inmates that had court schedules to attend. Life was hell, but it was part of the deal of being an inmate, a deal that you were forced into by virtue of being confined in the county jail, and there was nothing an inmate can do aside from falling in line or risking death.
Okay, now I would like to invite up fellow author Peter Conti. In addition to being a writer, Peter is also a college professor and from New York, which I feel is important when people from New York, they always need you to acknowledge that. He has written the award-winning plays House Arrest and Murderers Anonymous, the novel Whatever Happened to Martin Barnett, and the best-selling book Gringo, which is available now. Peter?
Andy made me wear this shirt. So you know. Okay, Valles the Unicorn. Weeks have passed since we were allowed the privilege of television, the newspaper, or other forms of access to the outside world. I still didn't have my court date scheduled. Also, the dorm had not had a lady officer work for weeks. So, on the one time we would be graced with one, it was a welcome prize that she was working the night shift. I knew that there would be a rush to proclaim this lady the wife of whoever got a smile out of her. To some, a simple hello could be interpreted as an acceptance of marriage. I knew that the night would bring much comedy to my life. Immediately after the last male officer finished his fawning over the lady officer, the inmate hound dogs hustled to a secure place in line to use the bathroom. Lining up to use the bathroom guaranteed you the opportunity to view the officer up close. I didn't join the circus affair right away, but I was able to hear someone in the line comment on the smell of her perfume. a comment that drew laughter from everyone in line, as we all knew that this lame attempt of winning the love of the officer was now made public. 1 hour had passed, and the line was buzzing with energy. I could hear the grumbling of voices as everyone knew that in a short time they would have to return to their bunks so the officers could enter the dorm and conduct the security check. I was certain the people would resume the sad affair once the officers left the room. Unfortunately, the tightening of my bladder was an indicator that I would inadvertently be joining the sad affair, and that there was little to do that I could be avoided in associating with the rowdy group that had assembled there. Some had even begun to pull at themselves, hoping to gain the ladies' attention. The night bathroom rules allow for more privacy than what transpires during the day. In all the dorms at night, there exists a one inmate in and one inmate out policy, where one could sit on the toilet and one could utilize the stand-up urinal. But one had to exit before anyone else entered. If someone entered while the 2 slots were occupied, it would be proper for the original occupant to consider the individual as an enemy ready to make his move. I stood in line, and I hoped the guy in front of me didn't waste time by asking the lady a lame question we all knew wouldn't go anywhere. Up to this point, I hadn't been able to view the lady fully, so I couldn't appreciate the buzz that was surrounding her presence. But once I took a look at her, I understood what was going on. She was arranging her hair, and I felt like I had interrupted a private moment. She sat with her perfect back arched, with all the grace of a ballerina, certainly not a security guard. I was up next, and it was my turn to be lame. I was now on my perverted side, and I was now allowing myself to believe that her stares were meant to convey some sort of a message of desire. My thoughts had shifted into high gear as she tucked in her blouse, and I imagined that she would call me to the gate and ask me my opinion on the buoyancy of her breasts, or how her slacks were cut, and how it played in her frame. I knew that I had yet to do anything obscene like so many of the characters before me. I hadn't made any vulgar gestures or any corny eye winks. I only admired her, or more accurately, studied her from a safe distance, and could only hope that my inquisitive stares didn't offend. Miraculously, I made it into the bathroom without crashing into the walls. There I stood at the disgusting urinal with a view of the dingy tiled wall. I quickly reviewed what I had just witnessed, hoping that her vision wasn't a mirage. She was fully a woman, which was surprising given that the sheriff's which was surprising given that it seemed that the sheriffs had preferred androgyny. I had begun to question the contempt the tailor had for the female form, based on, in part, how frumpy the uniforms fit the officers who claimed to be female. But this lady would change my mind of an evil conspiracy in the textile industry that I conjectured one night in my sleepless night at bed. Even though I had emptied my bladder, I remained at the urinal. I was in stable thought, but I flirted with the idea of approaching the gate when I exited the bathroom and start a conversation with her. I didn't know how I'd start, but I rationalized, if she had sympathy for my sad eyes, then maybe she would entertain me. I acknowledged my plan was not fully thought through. I just needed to see her up close. I was ready to make my move. There I was, firm, resolute in what I was going to do once I left the urinal. However, before I could tuck myself back in, a raspy old hag officer came into the picture shouting, "Velez!" The tone of the hag reminded me of the way someone would sound if they consumed unfiltered cigarettes since their youth. Her skin looked the part of an aged smoker as well. The old trucker who would interrupt my moment was a crab of a character, undoubtedly at the far end of her sexual potential. Compared to Velez, the trucker lacked vitality. She was of this world that I was trapped in. Velez was of the world I desperately wanted to return to. Thanks.
The final man that I'd like to welcome up here is actor Andy Fiscella. Andy has appeared in over 70 movies and TV shows. Fiscella. Andy has appeared in over 70 movies and TV shows. None of Rob's, though. And Andy is also CEO of Publish Enemies, the creators of graphic novel comic books. It also has to be noted that Andy is the supplier of tonight's free drinks and the shelter we're all presently in. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you, lovely lady. I'd like to clarify that I didn't make Peter wear that shirt. He showed up with a filthy guinea tea, the rat bastard. The festivities came to a close as the night officers arrived to conduct their count. Like every night before, the preacher gathered his flock and held a group prayer. The preacher never allowed the divisive politics of the jail to dictate his commitment of providing guidance to anyone who is seeking the spiritual component to help him explain their physical journey. In the last days, he had become humbled in his rhetoric. On this night, there wouldn't be bombastic speeches or laying of hands that is present in the Baptist tradition. The preacher instead spoke with a calm that conveyed a savant, like sympathy for his flock. I wondered what in his life had changed. It was past 1 a.m. and I was chasing sleep. I was a perpetual victim to my cough and the cruel thought that I was free. I was designed to the sad reality that I was not going to be able to enjoy the only act that allowed me pleasure, sleep. The only benefit is not being able to sleep was that I would finally see the night activities that until now I had little interest in viewing. Chaos warned me about the brute and his crew of flunkies. As it was with most crews in this place, they weren't bona fide tough guys, but merely a sad group of adolescent punks from some Compton Crip gang. Their power rested in the group as they walked the dorm, terrorizing the weaker inmates. They often channeled their attention onto the female night officer who sat at the desk on the other side of a grilled gate, believing that they could persuade the officer that they could only enhance her life if she would do their bidding and smuggle in contraband. They had yet to achieve that mission. Prior to my arrival, Chaos said that he witnessed a crew abduct a rival off his bunk as he slept. The victim left the building shortly after, naked and bleeding from his backside. They proved to Chaos that they were bloodthirsty war criminals who craved excitement. As I watched the lone brute walk down the dorm without his crew, he had an appearance of an old man suffering from arthritis pain in his joints. Or maybe the bumbling walk was a result of the burden of his life. I figured it best to keep the brute in sight. He and his flunkies had violent rituals that made it appear that blood was the necessary ingredient in their diet. I had to relieve myself, which meant I would have to pass the lone brute. I was firm in the decision to attack him first if he came within my zone. I reasoned that it would be better for my existence to err on the side of caution rather than allow him the advantage of having the first blow. He continued with his labor walk, and I continued to watch his movements. I returned to my bunk and pulled out my traveling satchel, a card from the mail that I had gotten, a stockpile. I had several pieces of mail from my friend M. In her cards, there were no talk of my predicament. She worked at taking my mind out of the world that I was trapped in by allowing me into hers. Her work and the family life entertained me greatly. She often sent cards and photographs of her animals and wrote notes in the voice of the dogs. I imagine when she wrote these words, she was curled up on her couch on a lazy day. She was attempting to relieve my pain, but only freedom would truly bring me calm. The days would dribble in the same fashion. Inmates would be transferred in and out of the dorm. Inmates would become victims to the system that had played allegiance to. I studied the obituary names. Inmates participated in prayer only to wake up and see their prayers were in the queue. And my irritating cough remained. I stood in line to receive the prescription of 2 Tylenols and drink lots of water. Coincidentally, that same prescription had been given to an inmate ahead of me in the line for his infected toenail. Another inmate had a rash covering his side, was also given the same prescription of Tylenol and water. I added help to my list of things that I prayed for. Days after witnessing the neutered version of the violent brute, it was alarming to see him confined to his bunk, forgoing his nightly stalking of the dorm. This was a welcome relief. Maybe his violent streak had come to an end, or so I had hoped. Right as I allowed myself to drift into a dream world, not expecting that I would be deposited back into the violent real world I had lived in, there was a cry for help. "Man down!" rang out the distress call that the inmates and the guards reserved for someone who was having a medical emergency. I woke up fast, wiping clouds from my eye. The lead brute was hanging from a sheet he had fixed to the grill gate at the far end of the bathroom. Biggie pulled the noose from his neck while 2 inmates held his body to relieve the weight. Even from a distance of my bunk, I could see that pasty blue flesh tone that covered his face. His soiled pants were an indicator that he was far into his escape plan. The officers made their way to the dorm, barking orders from the safe side of the gate. "Get down! Everybody get to the fucking bunks!" The officers nervously waited as they assembled inmates to clear the area before they entered. The officers would scream their orders again as they waited for Biggie and 2 other inmates that had stayed with the brute, assisting him with his breathing. Biggie worked his breathing maneuvers on the brute until he had restored the natural brown color of the brute's face. He then relieved himself of his post, allowing the nervous officers to enter with the medical staff. 5 officers entered, 7 assembled guards at the gate. The brute was carted out of the dorm with a little care as the gurney slammed against the walls and the gate with force. I could see the vacant look fixed in the brute's eyes as the gurney passed. He looked to be a man who fully realized that he was a failure. He couldn't even control his own act of suicide. Shortly after the officers cleared the dorm of any criminal wrongdoing, the preacher stood at the head of the dorm and acted out a eulogy for the brute. I realized that the dorm had unknowingly allowed the preacher's constant vigil to set the stage for how the dorm would end each night. He was humbled in his daily prayers, as it served as a basis for how he displayed his faith. But on this occasion, for the first time, the entire dorm was at his attention and ready to join in prayer. The preacher had what he desired all along: complete obedience to him.
Sure, I'm not sure if Riley would like to say something, but I'd just like to say thank you again to everybody. And we do have all the copies up here, so if you haven't already grabbed one, or you have and you need a second version for the car or something like that, come on up and we'll help you out. Here you go.
Increasingly been translated into Aramaic, if that helps.
The book is not in Aramaic.
He's got the Hebrew translation, if that helps.
We're going to open up your questions, and hopefully I have some answers for you. But thank you all for coming out to start with. Jake in the back.
All the times I've actually interviewed and talked to you, I never been asked, did you actually have personal interactions with Tookie?
Jake asked if I had personal interaction with Tookie Williams. I did not. Tookie Williams was executed in 2005. Any inmate that's sentenced to death, immediately after the sentence, they're sent to San Quentin Prison. It's the only death chamber in California for men. So if a female is sentenced to death, she's later sent over to for the death to be carried out at San Quentin. So I never met him. Joe in the back.
Any highs? I mean, we know what the lows are. Was there any highs at any point? Even in the situation for Riley?
Yes. It's my old bunkmate right here, Richard Bassett. Yeah, perfect timing. I'll ask you a question.
Oh, good to see you, brother. Nice
One
to
of
see you guys.
So one of the highs would be in times where you meet a friend who is a lifelong friend now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
And just like the story that Andy read, this guy was a brute, terrorizing the dorm, him and his crew. And one day, I didn't know his personal situation. I didn't know what he was facing in court. But one day he decided he had enough of whatever he was going through, and he tried to take an exit by suicide. So the guys that helped him off the ledge, off the noose, black inmate, Mexican inmate, two other Mexican inmates, and they stayed there and administered CPR to bring him back to life. So if there were any highs, it's in times like that where you see humanity. You know, this wasn't about this guy's from my gang, this guy's not part of my ethnic group, but it was a matter of this is a human, so you know I can't abandon him.
What about all the self-awareness? In hindsight, there are highs years later when you realize, I mean, for one, right, the good things that came from it, but also all the learning about yourself and growth, you know?
Yeah. Rob was expounded upon the question, yes. Any self-awareness, it's totally on you. Like anybody that goes into any AA program or any structured program where you know that the results are you can be better from taking up the cause to better yourself. It's on you. If you go in and your whole plan is to come out the same way, that exists. The ability to stay in your same mindset exists. The institution itself doesn't provide much in the way of rehabilitative programs. The little bit that exists mainly comes from your peers. Older guys or guys that have been around long enough to realize, if you realize that they have something to share, they have something to add to your journey, then it's about whether or not you're gonna latch on and try to get something out of it. Dawson.
I want to ask you, when you came home, what roadblocks and obstacles did you face, and how did you overcome them?
Dawson asked, what are the roadblocks I face, and how did I overcome them? I guess I'm still overcoming them and will for the rest of my life, because it's a matter of, you find that folks that proclaim to be so open-minded and forgiving, even though you haven't done anything to them, they aren't as open-minded as they may profess to be. So roadblocks have mainly been in the judgment of judging me as if I had just committed the crime that's now 15 years old, and as if I had committed the crime against them. Versus, let me interact with this person. Let's put on a veil of ignorance and just see whether or not this person is who he professed himself to be. So as far as roadblocks, I can give you, I was fortunate enough to have a support system with friends and family. So stepping out of prison, you get gate money, $200. So I paroled from a prison in Northern California, Tracy, and I had to buy my own Greyhound bus ticket for $40. So now I'm down to $160. I think I got a Red Bull and something else. So I'm down to $150. You're not released with a driver's license, a California identification card, so that's another $50. But first I gotta go to the the Social Security office to get my Social Security card, which is gonna cost me $15. So that $200, if I didn't have friends and family, if I was a guy that was destitute or whatever, I'd be in a bad position. Where was I gonna sleep that night? What was I gonna eat the next day? So roadblocks exist, in my perspective, from the system itself. It doesn't prepare you, or it doesn't provide the resources for you to be prepared coming out. Michelle.
What do you think got you through the most, getting through those days and those years, and was writing your book and the promise of that part of your survival?
Michelle asked what got me through the days and the years. In the first year of incarceration, not knowing if I would get a life sentence if I was convicted, what got me through that part was I had a challenge. Okay, my life's on the line, so let me battle this like my life is actually on the line. Once I accepted the plea bargain, I knew that I had a life to look forward to. Granted, 8 years was going to be the remainder of what I served, but I knew that there was something after 8 years. And seeing plenty of guys that came through younger than me, you hear their stories, you may not know their exact story, the veracity of what they are saying, but you hear, hey, they offered me 7 years, I didn't take it. Months later, you hear that guy got 50 years to life. You don't know the circumstances, but that stands out. That plays into you saying, all right, I did the crime. Everyone knows I did the crime. So it was just a matter for me of what can I bargain this down to that I can live with. And let's get on to the next part of it, which is I had to live inside there. I hope that answers. I'm going to go with Jeremiah.
So when you were sentenced, you got 8 years, right? After you didn't know if you were going to get life or not. Once they gave you the 8 years, did you feel like I'm coming home for sure after this 8 years, or did you ever feel like I might not make it through this 8 years?
Well, we know that no day is guaranteed, even in free society. Well, the question was, did I believe that I was coming home after the sentence? No certainty existed at any point. It's a hyper-violent society that you live in. Guys have these imaginary enemies, and you come in and you have to fall in line with one of the groups. And once you fall in line, you don't know the pre-existing wars that's already going on. You don't know who in your crew might have a certain infinity towards narcotics and how that affects you. A quick story to answer that. So we were together on a level 3 yard. So we came down from a level 4 security, which is the highest, to level 3. And we were together 3 years together on this yard. And we were both close to going to a level 2, lower security. That doesn't mean that trauma doesn't follow you wherever you are. You know, you can get beat up at the playground.
It's actually worse.
Yeah, it's worse because guys have more freedom, more access to crazy things. But so I think he was about 2 months from going to the new facility, and he was housed momentarily in a dorm environment. I was still in the sales, but we were on the same yard. And one of the guys in our crew, he was a real asshole, you know. And he made a stupid move, didn't tell any of us anything that was going on. And it was over selling ink for tattooing. But he's selling it to guys from a whole nother crew, and he burnt the guy. None of us knew about his dealings. None of us would profit from it. But he burns the guy, and the guy jams him up on the yard, and Happy and his bunkmate comes out, and they just get off on the guy. And so the yard goes down. We're about to come out for yard. He's in another building than I am. We get word something happened on the yard. We don't know exactly what. All the officers are saying, go back to your cell, go back to your cell, everyone back to the cell. So, you know, you're waiting to see who you know and making sure that they're somewhat in a safe place near their cell before you close your gate. And stuck on the one side of the building that we didn't have guys posted. Pete, you remember Peter? Peter stuck on the floor by himself, walking to his cell, and 3 dudes go at him. They beat him down. One lone female officer runs over and saved him, like drug him to safety against 3 inmates that were going at him. You know, Pete, simple dude, didn't fuck with anyone. But yeah, here are these assholes out there who burned a guy on a stupid deal, got the entire population at odds. You know, so 2-week lockdown. We come off lockdown. Yeah, we had the conversations with our adversaries beforehand, before we come off the lockdown, because once the gates open, you know, all of what we agreed to prior to coming off this lockdown. Now let's see if these guys actually stand with it. You know, we got off on one of their guys, they got off on one of ours. But, you know, where's the latent animosity, you know? Is it on one of our guys' sides? Are they going to think, let me get off on them before they get off on us? But this all started over about $20 worth of ink, you know. And Pete, you know, could have been hurt bad. You know, he was beaten down, but he survived. But it could have been worse for him, because the guys that jumped on Pete, those were their direct homeboys that had got jumped on the yard. So there was never a day where I thought for sure I'm coming home. You know, I'm gonna fight to the death to make sure I can get to that next stage, which is freedom. But there was never a day where I knew with certainty that it was guaranteed.
So when all this ended and you walked through the doors, the final walk, when you walked down and you hit freedom, as soon as you got out that door, what went through your head? What went through your mind? Like what was going on inside you when you knew it was over and you walked through that final door?
I already had the mindset preparing for release, and I just wanted to hurry to get to living, you know, whether it be to get a job, washing dishes, or construction. I just wanted to get around regular folks. So on the bus ride, the Greyhound bus ride from Tracy, California, I saw the Greyhound had improved. You know, there were plugs, they had Wi-Fi. I didn't have a cell phone, so the travel was about 5 hours, and we stopped through a town, Avenal, and I was in a prison in Avenal at one time. So we stopped in that town to, I guess that was one of the drop-off points as well as another pickup point. And I go to look for a phone booth. There were plenty around when I left. There weren't that many when I came out. So I'm looking for a phone booth. I can't find anything. I get back on the bus, and there was a young couple, guy and a girl, sitting next to me. And I asked the girl, I don't have a phone on me. You mind if I give my mom a call? No problem. Here, sure. I was like, oh, all right. Hey, I'm about 2 hours out of LA. I'll give you a call when I get there. Yeah. So having that experience where it was just, yeah, no problem. Okay. She doesn't know I just came out of prison. She's just interacting with the guy who's sat next to her for the last couple hours, you know. So I didn't want to have any, of course I didn't have a tattoo on my head that said prisoner release, so that helps. I just wanted to get to living, and living, staying busy and staying active.
But did you feel a big weight off your shoulders? I mean, was it a sigh of relief?
Yeah, sigh of relief came in different stages. When I left for level 3 and I went to a level 2, my blood pressure dropped 10 points. And reason for that is on a level 3, you walk under the catwalk with a guy with a mini 14 at every booth. So going to this level 2, that threat of if you and I get into it and the officer thinks I have a weapon and he shoots me, level 2, you don't have that threat. Granted, I fucked up and I went back to level 3 for a second, but you know, just going from level 3 to level 2, my blood pressure dropped, and there was some weight relief in that. So once I eventually got back to a level 2 of my last 2 years in prison, you know, there was those moments where you know, okay, I'm now down to 18 months, 9 months, 6 months, last 30 days, okay. Everything I've been planning, is it gonna really play out? So coming out, I guess I was so checking off those days on the calendar for so long that when the day actually came, it was more of, okay, you know, why did it take so long, you know? So there wasn't like an actual like hammer fall. It was just, let's get to doing what I had already been planning for. I got Lisa right here.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing your story. I wanted to ask something, like, as a writer also, like, with the glamorization of the prison industrial complex in, like, corporate media and in Hollywood, how did you feel writing the story? Did it change your perspective after seeing that, like, just with television shows and with books and, you know, just this glamorized vision of, like, what prison is? And your actual experience, did it make you bitter? Did it make you want to tell your story more from your perspective? How did that change that?
Was my experience different than what we see on television? Is the ultimate. You know, it's like you look at a show like Locked Up, and it's real for that moment, for that particular jail, for that prison that they're profiling, that yard. But anyone that's ever been confined, the themes that run throughout are isolation. Henry David Thoreau's book, which was written in a time of Abraham Lincoln, Civil Disobedience. It's about his one night that he spent confined because he didn't pay a ticket. That book still applies to this day, even though it was written 140 years ago, because in there he's talking about the ability of the state to take you, your physical body, and hold you in contempt, and you now have to answer these charges, whatever they may be. Mine was much more violent than not paying a ticket. So, but in his book, just as in mine, there is the isolation, you know, the humanity. In his book, he's talking with an inmate there who is like the town drunk who's always there. Those guys exist to this day there. You know, they're in that lifer installment plan. So what you see on television, is it any different than, and it made me want to speak out more. I don't think any part of my book glamorizes anything about prison. I didn't approach my writing with any vendettas. I had this distaste for certain groups, but my writing, I didn't try to say, okay, here's an opportunity to make these guys seem more punier than what they really were. The truth was, did that job alone. So what you see on Locked Up, and what you see in certain movies, some of it is laughable. Narrative film or reality television. Some of it is laughable, but it's sad entertainment to some degree. Is there a story that that's something redemptive about it? Okay, if they can in some way tie it in, if someone gets something out of this, so be it. But I didn't write it hoping to set the record straight on prison. I wrote it hoping to set the record straight on humanity. James.
Only one question. What was the first meal you wanted to eat when you got out? What was the first
meal? I had a slice of pizza. Pretty simple. I didn't have any major thirst for anything.
No food?
No, I was just taking everything in visually. Just wow, that's what I remember. Downtown LA looks a couple more skyscrapers. It was just more about consuming visuals. Jeff.
Yeah. What's it feel like now your book's out for you?
What's it feel like?
Yeah,
good.
What you expected and what's going on now? I mean, your story's out there. What's that feel like?
What's it feel like? I've had a positive feedback from from folks I respect. Family and friends. Jennifer's one of the first persons that read the book when I first typed it up. And she was scared of reading it because she was hoping that it wasn't garbage. That I was a horrible writer. How would you tell me you're a horrible writer and go work on a construction site? So when I gave it to her mom, 76-year-old lady, and then she called me. Then I gave it to her dad, and he called me when I was driving, and he said, I'm with the others. That was a line from the book. So, but then he and I had a long conversation. And then I gave it to a buddy of mine who was the exact same age at the time. We were both 39 at the time that I sent it over to him. He called me about 2 in the morning, and he was crying. And his thing to me was, man, I just didn't know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could have been there for you more. So, 76-year-old lady, 39-year-old guy, how do I feel? Those are great moments where friends and family, and then, folks that are my contemporaries, folks that I actually appreciate and know that they're talent, then for them to say, have the same reaction, the same response, it's rewarding on many levels, but, like anything that you put out, you hope that it can push conversation.
Yeah, so, you were mentioning, you talk about humanity, and you're out now. I just want to know, while you were locked up, for the amount of time that you were locked up, was there any one person that you were locked up with that gave you that, maybe wisdom, or that inspiration, or to say, hey, I know it's not true, we're not all going to be out of here, but you're going to get out. Was there anybody there that you had this special kind of relationship with, who inspired you, and do they know that you wrote this book?
Good question. Anyone inside that inspired me, that knows I've written the book? I've kept in contact with a couple guys, and a couple that I have sent it to. It's just like in free society, you find out certain guys that you jail with that work. And then plenty of guys you're just, you keep surface conversation. Hey, hello, hi, cocktail conversation, keep going. That exists on the inside. That guy might be in your crew, so, how do I keep this camaraderie surface, knowing that this guy has to have my back? So there aren't many that I had in that category of I'm going to continue continue this friendship going forward. You know, anyone on the inside that gave words of wisdom, you know, that old saying, metal sharpens metal. You know, when I got to the level 3 yard, Richard was already on the yard. We, you know, individually had already had our experiences on level 4s and level whatever else. But coming to that yard, I'm now the new guy. So, you know, Richard and other buddies that are there who are giving me the rules of the road for this particular yard. Each yard has its own chemistry to it. So, you know, you look at it, he's younger than me, but that goes out the window. You know, he's the veteran. He's the veteran at that moment because he's been here. He knows the guys that I might not know. So, you know, you humble yourself and you accept guidance from those that have already been there, you know. So it comes in many forms, I would say. Joe, let's take the last question because we're almost at 9. And being that we have free drinks until 9, we want to empty the bar and sell some books. Last question.
Is it true that you almost had to keep your release date to yourself because there are inmates that would try and sabotage that date if they found out?
Okay, everyone heard Joe. Joe's never been to prison, so that's why he would know this question. Yeah, you know, you never want to be looked at as spiking the ball. You know, my good fortune is to someone else can look like, you know, okay, you're trying to shove it in my face. And it might not even be some, you know, direct, but it could be some subversive shit. Why am I holding back? It could be some subversive shit from someone where simple conversation where they're looking for some funk interaction to get you out of yourself, to get you out of that mindset, you know. So, and there's a lot of guys in there that it might be weird to hear this, but there's a lot of guys in there that's looking for somebody else to take them out. You know, their situation is that bleak and just funky that they wouldn't mind somebody else taking them out. They may not have the courage to do it themselves. So you being the one that is in their face at that moment, and now we hear you got some good news, yeah, they might be looking for you to make a move on them. So if they gin up a situation where that can happen, then, you know, they won. So I didn't, you know, maybe a handful of guys that I knew on the yard when I was about to leave that knew, but I didn't advertise it. You know, certain things happen when you're like 20 days to parole. You know, you're taken out of the job or the school you're in. So if I didn't tell anyone, everyone also would know, okay, he's close to going home. And, you know, one of the most interesting, and I said this to this person, I had a pre-release conference with like, I don't know what she was with the parole division or so. And she goes through a checklist of things, you know, do you have family, help, connection, this or that. And then she goes through a couple of questions. Do you feel like you were done wrong in court, like you were given the wrong amount of time? And I said, not at all. And I saw her eyes shot up. And she's like, what are you talking about? You don't think you were done wrong? I said, no, I did everything in the indictment and a little bit more. So I'm thankful that I got the time down to 10 years, but not at all. So she was dumbfounded because I guess folks come to her with the poor me, you know, oh, woe, my pain, the system wore me down. I couldn't perpetrate that fraud on myself that in some way the system wore me down, you know. So keep it to yourself. Don't spike the ball. Anybody want to buy a book, please come up here. This is Mo from Diesel Books. Real quick, if anyone is interested.